Hello, and welcome to episode 19 of our podcast series, Unraveling the Revelation, a detailed look at the influences on the Church of God's interpretation of the book of Revelation. I'm Dale Rude. I apologize for any of you that have listened to this particular series before. I realized through a friend that my slides were not included in the last recording, and so I apologize for that. I could see them moving on my screen, but it wasn't being recorded that way. So I'm going to redo this particular episode and include the graphics. As always, if you have any comments, questions, criticism, please send those to respondingtoreligiousramblings@gmail.com. And be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel so that when I upload new information, you'll get notification. Also, if you're enjoying these podcasts, please consider sharing it with a friend at the link there shown on the screen, or you can just go to YouTube and type in Responding to Religious Ramblings with underscores between each word. Let's get into our episode. I showed this slide in the previous episode, and these are the first five books that described the seven seal teaching. And it was on the far left-hand side, the 1933 book published by Warner Press and authored by W S Goodnight. That was the first seven seal publication on this Revelation series. As was their practice, they would provide revisions on occasion as they would learn more things, and they would update and usually issue another book. But if you notice on the second book, which was written in 1936, just 3 years after the first publication, it includes a couple of new names, W Pendleton and S McAlister, and this book was self-published. In the third book that was released was in 1945, or possibly even 1941, since it was actually not marked what date or what year that was. You have to kind of infer what year it was based on the events that are being told there. And so my best estimate is about 1945. We also see Brother Goodnight, and we have a new name here, and that's F Lawson, as well as W Pendleton. So S McAlister was no longer involved in this particular project. The fourth book that was revised and released was in 1948, and it was titled The Revelation with Gospel and Prophecy, Past, Present, and Future. Brother Goodnight was still the main author. This time he was assisted by the two same brothers, Brother Lawson and Brother Pendleton, and this was again in 1948, and it was self-published. The last and final book in this particular on this particular subject was revised in a major way and released in 1955. Now, Brother Goodnight died in 1953, and so we don't see his name included on this particular book, but all of his writings, for the most part, are included, as well as some additional information. And now we see F Lawson, P.D. Turnbow, D.W. Rogers, but we do not see G.W. Pendleton. And so this was a matter, it looks like about 7 years, and it was also, this book was self-published. Now this is by far the most widely distributed book of all the books that you see on the screen. And this is the one that was in our home when I was growing up. It was also available at the camp meeting that we attended at God's Acres in Newark, Ohio. So 1955 was when it was released, and as I said, most of the time when people think about seven seal teaching, at least the beginning years of it, this is the book that they will refer to. What I'm going to do in this podcast are introduce you to these brethren and tell you a little bit about them and a little bit about their lives. So here's a picture of all of them together. These are the early Seven Seal leaders and colleagues of W.S. Goodnight. Now, I've already talked to you about Brother Goodnight and his life, so I did not include him in this episode. You can go back and watch the previous episode where I introduced Brother Goodnight. Let's start with G.W. Pendleton. His full name was Garrett William Pendleton. He was born in 1905, and he died in 1988. He was born in Dixon, Missouri, and died in Mountain Home, Arkansas. His nickname and the name that he was known by his family and friends was just simply Penn. Like Brother Goodnight, he worked in a shoe factory, and he eventually became the foreman. He married Fanny Elizabeth Jones in December of 1924, and unfortunately, they divorced in June of 1953. And they had, I believe, 4 or 5 children together. He later remarried Martha Berg in 1956. In the paperwork, the petition for divorce that Brother Goodnight submitted, he basically alleged a term that we don't use too often, and that is indignities, which simply means conduct which renders the other spouse's condition intolerable and life burdensome. Now, I'm not going to share the details of what happened to the first marriage. It was widely known what happened, but I'm just not going to go into that on this particular episode. And so let me just say that there seemed to be cause, if you will, for that divorce. And I know that that's a controversial subject as far as that goes. And certainly it was even in this situation. So there was something that happened, and again, it was widely known. He was saved in 1929 at the age of 24 and was called to the ministry soon after his conversion. Now, he became acquainted with Brother Goodnight in 1930, and shortly after, these two brethren, along with some other brethren, studied the book of Revelation every day for 6 months. You can imagine what experience that might have been. And this was in 1930, so it's no doubt that they came in contact when Brother Goodnight sent out his booklet to quite a few ministers that particular year, and then started getting feedback. So apparently there must have been some interest from Brother Pendleton. They came in contact, and they started working together. Upon working with Brother Goodnight, Brother Pendleton stated that more light and deeper understanding was made plain. Now, Penn, or Brother Pendleton, was ordained with the Church of God Anderson in June of 1932. He started publication and a radio show called the Seventh Trumpet Ministry and Publications. His radio show was included in a station called XEG, in which we'll talk about a little later in our presentation. Now, Brother Pendleton was listed in the yearbook from 1931 until 1950. Now, I want you to observe that end date. So while they were talking about the seventh seal and the conditions that were that was going on there in the Anderson Church of God, they still remained in contact and in fellowship with the Anderson body, and they did so in some cases, in his case, till 1950. Here's a few pictures of Brother Pendleton. On the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, you see him standing behind a podium and with the microphone that says XEG. He was no doubt going to record a program. And he also played the guitar and sang. He had been, I believe he was in the military. And so there's a picture of him in the middle with some kind of uniform there, just sitting down and playing some music. On the right-hand side, you see the front of the building called the Trumpet Press. And Brother Pendleton had started a publishing work where he published a lot of Revelation-related material. Here's some more pictures of Brother Pendleton and the place where he did his publishing. So there he is standing in front of a Revelation chart, and as you can clearly see, you have the two last periods of time, church ages on there, from 1880 to 1930, and then from 1930 to 1980. And then on the right-hand side, you see what was later termed the Camp of the Saints. In the upper right-hand corner, you see a picture of the side of the trumpet press. And down below, you just see the sign that advertises the trumpet press as well as the gospel radio station. Now, Brother Pendleton started publishing a monthly paper in 1943, and it was titled The Seventh Trumpet, which still exists to this day. They're still producing that. In fact, I believe it is probably, well, I'm pretty sure it's the most longest running seventh trumpet paper in existence. In his writings, he placed special emphasis on the name New Testament Church of God, which he claimed to be a fulfillment of Revelation 3:12, where it talks about, I will give you a new name. And so since the Anderson movement was already being referred to as the Church of God, he believed there was some significance in that particular expression, that passage there. And so all of their properties and their legal work and so forth was under the name New Testament Church of God. I mentioned this real briefly, but he published numerous articles, booklets, and tracts, and most of those were focused on the seventh seal message. Now, Brother Pendleton strongly opposed the Church of God's cooperation and financial support of the National Council of Churches, and ultimately he broke away from the Church of God Anderson, but he kept the same fundamental doctrines. Now, we talked previously about the Church of God's cooperation with ecumenical bodies of Christians, Christian organizations. The Church of God, to the best of my knowledge, has not officially joined any of those particular ecumenical movements, even to this day. But they have cooperated with some, and they've worked with various organizations just for overall having an awareness of what was going on, and trying to stay informed and keep other people informed of what they were doing. And he talks about financial support. I'm not sure exactly what that meant. But that nonetheless, these were very strong issues for him, and so he broke fellowship with them and went his own way. So there on the left-hand side, you actually see a couple of issues of the seventh trumpet paper. This particular issue was written in September, October of 1988, volume number 45. So at that point, it had been in existence in 1988 for 45 years. And you can see the title, The Seventh Trumpet, and there's a picture of Brother Pendleton. Now, he passed away in 1988. And so they had a memorial issue in his memory. Now, Brother Pendleton also wrote a book, autobiography, titled 50 Years of Roses and Thorns. And on page 90 of that particular autobody, I'd like to read a few words that he included. He said this: during a victorious camp meeting, some 15 ministers representing several states, met to propose and plan a publication of Revelation. This was in 1943, and the name of the publication would be called The Seventh Trumpet. And it was to be financed by free will contributions by its readers and sent to everyone who requested it. That paper is in circulation today after 39 years. It has had a far-reaching effect over the world, bringing more light and understanding of prophecy and revelation of monumental value. So Brother Pendleton was a big supporter of the seventh trumpet message, and played a significant role in establishing that teaching. Now he states what the purpose of the seventh trumpet paper was, and this was something that was included in the October 1946 issue, and it says the following. It may seem that we have far too many church papers printed today, and therefore we do not need any more. But will you consider with me a few reasonable reasons why we feel that this periodical should be printed? First, as far as we know of, the Church of God Reformation does not have a regularly printed publication in America, which is exclusively devoted and issued in the interest of prophecy and the revelation message. Therefore, we feel the need of this printed message. Secondly, we as a publication committee feel the burden and urge of this great message and the need of it going forth. Since, quote, necessity is the mother of invention, unquote, the need of this truth today prompts the burden and effort in getting it to our people, we as well as others who have never heard the truth on Revelation. Blessed is he that readeth and they that hear the words of this prophecy, Revelation 1:3. But how can they read it without a publication, and how can they hear it without a preacher? Romans 10:14. Third, the revelation message, Babylon is fallen, and come out of her, my people, with the message of one church, and many other truths along with prophetic subjects concerning the dragon, the beast, and the image of the beast, during Brother D.S. Warner's day and later, helped to promote the message of the biblical Church of God, and which message, when obeyed, by the help of the Lord, produced a people free from sectism and sin. If it accomplished that much then, and it did, will it not do the same thing today? We believe it will when it is promoted. There are millions today who have never heard the truth of the revelation message, and we feel that there is a need of the genuine message of truth going forth in this paper that will help to do so. So those were the reasons that was cited for the creation of a new paper focused on revelation and prophecy. Now, it wasn't just preaching and it wasn't just radio or publications that was being used to promote the message of the seventh seal, but there were also groups of singers. Here we have a picture of the Whitfield family. And they used to come to, I know they had come to God's Acres and sang, and they had gone around to a number of camp meetings. Certainly they went to revivals where there was revelation focus, and they would sing songs, and I believe a couple of them are still alive today. So Brother Pendleton ministered over the radio for several years, and his program was called the Seventh Trumpet Hour. Brother Pendleton was on some 35 stations across the U.S., Mexico, and the Bahamas. And the station that we referred to already, which was AM XEG, was known for its border blaster status in the 1950s. And so it reached a lot of people. And so often this particular group, when Brother Pendleton was recording programs for the radio stations, they would sing songs. Okay, I mentioned this earlier. Brother Pendleton and his first wife divorced, and he married Martha Berg in 1956. She assisted him in the remainder of his ministry. Now, Brother Pendleton died in August of 1988 at the age of 82. As you can imagine, Brother Pendleton's divorce and remarriage caused him to be separated from fellowship with many of the brethren with whom he had been working, and for a short time, the message seemed to be nearly silent. Now there's a picture of Martha Berg sitting at her computer station, and she's actually working on an issue of the Trumpet, the 7 Trumpet paper, and this was in 2006. The last issue she was able to complete was the December-February 2010 issue, and she died in December of 2011. In preparation for this particular series of a podcast and this particular study, research project, I spoke to her, and she was a very kind lady, very nice, very helpful. She sent me some literature that I found to be quite useful. So, but nonetheless, because of the divorce and remarriage and all the circumstances that were involved in that, which I said I'm not getting into on this episode or this podcast, Brother Pendleton found himself out of fellowship with the brothers that were listed there on those books. And that's why you don't see his name on the 1955 revised version. Okay, the next person we want to talk to is C.S. McAlister, or Charles Samuel McAlister. Now, he was born in 1869, and he died in 1956. He was born in Adams Park, Indiana, died in San Diego, California. He also worked on a farm, and he is the brother to Sister Clara M. Brooks, who was a Church of God hymn writer. And if you sing out of the Evening Light or the hymnal of the Church of God, the old hymnals, you will find her name on several different songs there. 3 of her more well-known hymns are What a Mighty God We Serve, I Am His Child, By Faith and Not by Sight. She wrote those songs, and that was his sister. Brother McAlister married Albertina Vogel, who was from Switzerland, in the year 1899, and she died 11 years later in 1910. He then married Guthrie Elizabeth Mark in 1911, and she died in 1934. Now, Brother McAlister is listed in the yearbook from the year 1917 until 1955, just shortly before his death. So he stayed connected with the movement until he died. He entered the ministry in 1896, just 1 year after the death of D.S. Warner. So you can imagine that Brother McAlister seen a lot take place from the time he entered the ministry until the time that he died, and even up until the time of 1930. So he most likely may have been the oldest leading minister and advocate of the Seven Seal Church age in the early years of the movement. And again, it's certain that by 1930 he would have witnessed many changes that had taken place within the Anderson movement. Brother McAlister labored in Hutchinson, Kansas, Gorman, Texas, and Raymond, California. But in 1945, he had retired. By 1945, he had retired from pastoring. From 1946 to 1950, he was involved in evangelistic and ministerial work that was based out of California. But he fully retired in around 1953, just 3 years before he passed away. Now, since his name only appears as an assistant on the first updated Seven Seal book, he may have either abandoned the Seven Seal teaching or tried to reform the system from within. We don't see any references to him after that particular issue or revision was published. So we don't really know what happened to him. But he did stay a minister, and he did stay in the line of ministry clear up until shortly before his death. There's a picture of Brother McAlister there on the left-hand side, and also on the right-hand side with his wife. The next person we want to talk about is James Franklin, or J.F. Lawson. He was born in 1887, and he died in 1957. He was born in Hancock County, Tennessee, and he died in Milton, Freewater, Oregon, and he also was a farmer. Brother Lawson married Minnie Mae Watts in 1909, and after she died, he married Bertha Mae Trout in 1918. Now, Brother Lawson is listed in the yearbook from 1919 until 1947, long after 1930. And so you see a pattern here. So while these brethren were proclaiming the message of the seventh trumpet or the seventh seal, they stayed connected to the Anderson body and stayed actively involved. Brother Lawson entered the ministry in 1916 at the age of 29. He was a very strong advocate of divine healing, and he had been ill, but he felt that the Lord showed him that he could be healed if he would take his stand and come out of the Anderson body. When he left the movement, it was reported that he did receive healing. Now, Brother Lawson wrote several booklets on prophetic subjects, and these booklets are fairly concise, and Brother Lawson was a pretty good writer. So they're not easy reads, but they're not as complicated as some of the larger publications. His writings include, you may recognize some of these, the Reformation, the Seven Churches of Asia, the Three Temples, the Church that Jesus built, in his last book, What is Babylon? While his last book was being printed, he died of cancer, and that was in the year 1957. In the 1955 revised book, when it was published, that was the one that's titled The Revelation with Gospel and Prophecy, you'll notice that only the authors that were listed on there was Lawson, Turnbow, and D.W. Rogers. Okay, so at that point, Brother Goodnight's dead. Brother McAlister, we don't know what happened to him. And Brother Pendleton was out of fellowship. Someone had left them an estate, and that estate had been left for the furtherance of the gospel, and these three brethren were named as executors. It was through this inheritance that the book was published, as well as, no doubt, other publications. Clearly, Lawson was the primary contributor, and the other brethren were his assistants. Now, I want to just read a couple of quotes to you that I think will give you a sense of how Brother Lawson was thinking, his mindset. This first quote was taken from the book called The Reformation, the booklet called The Reformation, and it's on page 23. This great movement, with its earthly organizations and headquarters, now calling itself Church of God, is of the same nature and origin as all other Babylonian movements. Therefore, it is a part of Babylon itself. It has the same quality and kind of subjects, good and bad mixed up together, and the same kind of government. It too has become the cage of every foul, every unclean and hateful bird, and the hold of every foul spirit. That's some pretty strong statements there that Brother Lawson made about the Church of God Reformation movement. Here's another quote. The Sixth Seal, or Warner Age, ending in 1930, brought a clear message of God's plan of complete redemption and a divine church. Lukewarmness has caused this people to lose their vision of divine truth. They have gone back to building the things they once tore down. God is once more setting his hand the second time and the last time to gather a people for his name. This is the camp of the saints, a remnant and third part which brought through the fire, represented as armies on white horses, making the last march in battle, getting ready for the return of Christ. And so you see here he makes a reference to that time era, the Camp of the Saints, that we spent quite a bit of time on in our last podcast. Here's a picture of Brother Lawson over on the left-hand side, maybe in his younger years, and then also on the right-hand side with his wife, Bertha. Okay, let's move on to our next person of interest. His name was Paul David, or P.D. Turnbow. He was born in 1912, and he died in 1973. Now, he was born in Creek County, Oklahoma, and he died in Shawnee, Oklahoma. He married Laura Ruth Lawson, and later she divorced him and she remarried. Now, Brother Turnbow is not listed in the yearbooks. He was saved when he was in his mid-30s and called to preach within the first year of his conversion. So he preached his first message at the Church of God in Moore, Oklahoma. Now, he did pastor there in Moore, Oklahoma for a time, and that was the only place he pastored, and that was for about 10 years between the years 1957 and 1967. It was here that a small publishing house was established where much of the early Seven Seal literature was published. Now, Brother Turnbow became a very close associate of Brother Emerson, or E.A. Wilson, from Newark, Ohio, and they worked together from the years 1960 to 1966. In fact, as one of Brother Emerson's son told me, Brother Turnbow may have in fact given Brother Wilson his first revelation chart. Brother Turnbow suffered many things in his life to promote the church and the Seven Seal message. And sadly, his wife Ruth was not saved, and she often opposed him and his efforts. So it was a difficult life. Brother Turnbow actually wrote an autobiography of his life, and I have a copy of that, and it's very interesting to read. But the brother, unfortunately, his wife was not saved, and in fact, she was kind of involved with Brother Pendleton's first wife, and those two were working together and discovered reasons that led up to the divorce. So, Brother Turnbow resigned as pastor in 1967, and when he could no longer physically take care of himself. At the end of his ministry, he suffered several strokes and had a nervous breakdown. Brother Chancellor told me once that Brother Turnbow, who I understand he knew, or certainly his father did, he almost overnight became a tottering old man that walked around taking in little of what was happening around him. So his condition had deteriorated to the point that he wasn't really too much aware of his surroundings. And so he was admitted to a nursing home in Shawnee, Oklahoma, where he lived for 4 years and then died. These pictures were taken at the Moore, Oklahoma camp meeting in the year 1961. On the left-hand side, you see a picture of Brother Emerson Wilson and his wife and one of their sons. On the right-hand side, you see 4 brothers, one of them being James McKenzie on the left-hand side. And then the tall brother there is B.F. White. The third one is Chester Mark. And then on the far right-hand side is Brother Paul Turnbow. So they obviously worked together. And I know Brother Emerson would go out to Moore, Oklahoma quite often, and he would preach revivals and even camp meetings out there. And so they were all out there in 1961, and they got their those 4 got their picture taken, and then there's a picture also of Brother Emerson and his family. And here are a couple other pictures. The one on the left-hand side, Brother Turnbow in 1942, and the picture on the right-hand side, Brother Turnbow in 1957. Okay, the last person that we want to introduce to you in this episode is David William, or D.W. Rogers. Brother Rogers was born in 1893 and died in 1972. Now, he was born in Arkansas, and he lived in Bristol, Oklahoma, and died in Stroud, Oklahoma. He married Marion E. Carter in 1902. Now, he was not called to be a church leader, but rather he was a very faithful helper. And it's always great to have people like that around supporting the work of God. Brother Rogers' role in the 1955 revised book was not so much as a prophetic writer, but more as a recorder. So he just worked with the other brethren to make sure that the thoughts that they had were being captured. And so he worked on that piece of it. They said he was a very quiet, soft-spoken man, former sergeant in the U.S. Army. He never pastored a church, or he never even preached much. However, he did apparently teach Sunday school class. He was known as a humble man of faith and was often called for prayer by those in need. Now, Brother Rogers' wife, she had several health issues, and after her death in 1962, Brother Rogers dedicated himself to the work of God by traveling with Brother Turnbow and holding revivals. Okay, so that's the end of that segment in our episode. So I want to talk a little bit about this new trademark. So there was a lot of excitement, obviously, and the message of 7 seals and the 7 trumpet message began to sound, and it was primarily among existing Church of God congregations. And they would go out and then have meetings, revivals, camp meetings, where this message was widely proclaimed, as well as literature was being published. And so a lot of people wanted to have their own revelation chart. And I would say that most of the 7 seal Church of God congregations have a revelation chart. It's just something they talk about frequently. I mean, as I was saying when I was young, we used to have weeks-long revivals where they would talk about the very series of these symbols and so forth. And so there is a definite focus on revelation and the symbols within the 7 seal churches. Now, that's not true of a lot of the churches that are non-7 seal. The Church of God, like the Guthrie, Oklahoma movement, for instance. Most of the people I've talked to, they don't know a whole lot about the book of Revelation. It's just not a focus point for them. And there's a couple other groups out there too that's kind of independent that just don't spend a lot of time on this particular book. But that's not the case in 7 seal. It is very much a focus. And so you see some pictures here on the upper left-hand side. Is a quartet singing. I think one of those was Brother Chancellor's daughter, I believe. And you can see the Revelation chart in the background. And they all look very similar. So they all took that same pattern that I introduced to you, that Brother Goodnight and those early brethren, that drawing that was put in place. They all pretty much copied that same thing. But they would have different people doing it, and of course they're all unique in that way. In the lower middle section, you see that chart I talked about in a previous podcast. This is at the old barn in Newark, Ohio. They had taken their Revelation chart. I believe this is probably one of their first ones, if not the first one. And they had put it out probably during a meeting where people could come and look at it and take pictures. On the right-hand side, you see this is actually the New Testament Church of God. So this is one of Brother Pendleton's the congregations that they fellowshipped. And this is in Mansfield, Illinois. And Sister Imogene Franklin is on the left-hand side, and she was actually a chart lecturer. So you can see the picture there in the back. I have several Revelation charts at my house. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but I have several original charts as well as copies. Now, all the people that were Church of God did not accept the seven seal message. Even those who had become independent and broken off of the main body or the Anderson body. One of those groups is a group that's out of Hagerstown, Maryland, and I believe they call themselves the Church of God Universal. They actually have, I think they're one of the few groups that have more congregations outside of the U.S. than they do in the U.S. I don't think they have very many congregations actually in the U.S., but they do have several works in other foreign countries. And as you can see, this particular graphic here was taken out of Brother Alvin Craig's 1965 book titled Messages from the Book of Revelation. And as you can see, it's the typical 4 dispensations or 4 church eras that we saw in Brother Warner's and Brother Riggle and those other early brethren. So they teach Revelation the same way that that was taught in the early years of the Church of God, and even now in the Anderson Church. So, got a few dates on there, but it's the main dates that we always see. 270, 1260, 350, and then leading us to the evening light, and then they have a number of question marks after that. So they didn't get into the whole thing about predicting when the second coming was going to be and all that. They do include some references to Luther and justification, Wesley and sanctification, and unity and Warner, but they don't have separate church ages described for those. So I just wanted to put that out there to let you know that everybody that may have at one time been with the Church of God Reformation movement but left, they did not all accept the message of 7 seals. And to this very day, that particular church body does not accept the teaching of 7 seals. Here's another example. This particular booklet here is called the so-called 7 seal message refuted, and it was put out by Brother H.P. Husky, who is affiliated with the Church of God Evening Light, and more specifically the saints there that published the Faith and Victory paper out of Guthrie, Oklahoma. And so this whole book was written as an attempt to refute the 7 seal message. So let me expand on that a little bit more. As I said, that particular movement, these are the people that, if you recall in an earlier podcast, they broke away around 1910 over the necktie issue, which they believed represented an overall deterioration in the Church of God Reformation. So they broke away before the 7 seal message was even adapted or probably even thought of. So it just makes sense why they don't understand or have little interest in 7 seal message. Not only that, but I've read you a few quotes so far, and the leaders of the 7 seal were really strong. I would almost say, you might even say dogmatic about people walking in the light of the 7 seal. So they would view people like Faith and Victory folks out in Guthrie, Oklahoma, as walking behind light. And so they would, they called them fanatics and that kind of stuff, because they were just, there had been changes that had taken place by 1930, and those changes were not part of the Guthrie, Oklahoma movement. They still, for instance, they don't believe in tithing. Well, tithing came along in the 20s in the Church of God Reformation, but the Guthrie people don't believe in tithing. They don't use musical instruments in the church. And obviously that came along, and now most Church of Gods use musical instruments. So there's a number of issues like that that's out there. And so seven seal people tend to view the six seal people. And by the way, the Evening Light Saints, they would never refer to themselves as six people. They don't even know about that stuff. So we refer to them as six seal people, but they don't really use that. That's just a label. They don't use that expression to describe themselves. So they basically, that's how they view them. But then the Evening Light people, they look at the seventh seal and they see what that message has produced. And there's been all kinds of issues. And as we all know, the Seven Seal movement is split up and fractured into a bunch of little warring groups, so to speak. It seems like every time there's a division, both sides go away, and they have very bad things to say about the people that they left. And when Seven Seal has a split, it's just it becomes very what's the right word? It just becomes very well, I was going to say dogmatic. It's not really dogmatic, but they become almost vicious. And that's probably a really strong word, but towards each other. And so when the Six Seal people look at this stuff, they're like, why would we want to be involved in something like that? If that's what the fruit of the Seven Seal message, please, I don't want anything to do with it. And I really can't blame them. I can't blame them for that. So there's these two, sides of this issue that are out there, and while they all have roots that go back to D.S. Warner and the early Reformation of the Church of God, they don't work together. They really have very little involvement with each other. Sometimes there'll be families that might be have members in one group and one of the others, but otherwise, the Six Seal people, Evening Light, they're off doing their own thing, and Seven Seals off doing their own thing as well, and all proclaiming unity. Okay, so that book was actually written in 1971. Okay, so that ends our podcast number 19. If you have any comments or questions, again, please feel free to send those to me at respondingtoreligiousramblings@gmail.com, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And I mentioned in a previous one that it doesn't benefit me to subscribe. What I meant by that was this isn't a monetary thing. I'm just doing this to document my journey. So if you just subscribe or not, it doesn't matter to me from that perspective, but it's to your benefit to subscribe in that you get notifications when new episodes are uploaded. All right, so thank you very much for your time. Appreciate those of you that have been following along, and certainly appreciate the input that I've received so far. It's been very encouraging.